It's this idea that every time we make a change, there are different stages that we as human beings tend to go through. Pre-contemplation, contemplation, and then preparation, action, and we go to relapse and then maintenance. I think that what you're describing right now could teeter on relapse if it's not caught early enough. And I think that that's where that question is like, hey, how do I mature in my decision-making process, in the behaviors that I'm doing, without reverting back to some of the old behaviors that ultimately got us in the position that we want. And the reason I say it's so loaded, Nina, is because oftentimes with relapse behaviors, it's very subtle.
Welcome to the Christ Centered Stewardship podcast with your hosts, Maria Casillas and Nino Villa. Christ Centered Stewardship is a ministry of new money habits designed to equip believers to steward everything God has given them, including their time, talent, and treasure in ways that bring Him honor, glory, and praise. You can join our growing community on Facebook and submit your questions to podcast at newmoneyhabits.com. Now, to begin today's episode, here is Maria Casillas and Nino Villa.
Maria, as you know, we are delivering Christ Centered Stewardship, the class, the program, currently, and there are interesting conversations taking place in that room, and we thought that we would bring those conversations to this conversation.
I'm excited about it. They're fun combos.
They are, because the participants always have really good questions. When they're looking for clarity, they ask that clarifying question, hey, what do you mean? How do I do? That sort of thing. But interestingly enough, funny enough, there was a couple in class this past week that caught me right smack dab into a contradiction. Like, wait a minute. I thought you said this, and then I heard that. So which one is it? So I thought we'd share that faux pas, that blunder, and talk about why it happened.
I love it. Before you share that, though, I'd just like to say that this couple left the class and then reemerged about 10 minutes later. And I think that's just what's so funny about it, because they were clearly discussing it afterward and thought it was so important to them that they wanted to come back and clarify with you. And so I think that's awesome that our listeners are actually conversing outside of the class as well.
Yeah. I get this image in my head of they're walking back to the car, they're discussing it, and it's like, hold on, wait, I heard this. Well, I heard this. Yeah. Well, let's just go back and get clarification.
And so I can't help but picture that replay commercial where they're trying to figure out which one is right. So anyway, yep. As it turns out, they were both right, and you were the one who had a bit of a contradiction, you said, yes. Right?
Yep. So what happened? Here's what happened. I guess I'll start with a little bit of the reasoning to just frame it. And that reasoning is, a lot of times I will speak here on the podcast, inside the classes, I will speak in the present tense, a habit, a technique that I've used in the past that I may have graduated from and I do a little bit differently. But I have to remember where I started, and I have to remember where to help clients get started. Because if I try to help them get to where I am today, I think it's a little messy. In fact, I have 13 years of experience where sometimes I skip steps and I realize, I've actually just made it worse for the client. So I will, again, share things in the present tense that maybe I don't actually do anymore. And the one that I shared, I said, hey, my wife and I, we have two separate checking accounts. And one of those checking accounts is specifically for gas and routine maintenance on the cars. And we fund that every payday with X number of dollars, let's say $200. And I know that in that pay period, I'm not going to use $200 worth of gas, But it allows for a couple things. One, a separate debit card linked to that checking account so that when I'm at the pump, I can use that debit card and it's specifically for gas. The other thing is because I know I won't use the full $200, maybe I'll use $150, give or take. That surplus, that extra, builds up over a period of 3, 4, 5 months. And when I need an oil change, I already have the money set aside. Right? So you see how that's like a brilliant technique? It's a brilliant thing to do.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So what was the problem? The problem is Nino doesn't do it that way anymore. Nino spoke in the present tense as if he and his wife were doing it that way. But that's not necessarily how we do it any longer. And so why the difference? But before I reveal why the difference, I'd love to hear your perspective on this story so far.
Oh, I think it's just such a natural thing, honestly. I think about, when we drive, you mentioned there are certain things that we do because we've been doing it for so long. You mentioned like 13 years. And, I've been driving, I'm going to date myself now, but for 30 years. And the things that I do now, I would never tell my children to do yet, right? I mean, as they start to increase their level of confidence on the road and things become more, just natural, then things they'll probably start to drive like me as well. But right now, I want them to think through every little thing that they're doing, right? That's kind of what you're talking about here, is that you used to do something a lot more less natural. I don't know. This was something that truly is brilliant, but it was not something that you continue to do forever and ever because now things are coming a little bit more naturally to you. But this couple or anybody who's going through this class, they may not be at that spot yet. And so it's important for us to go back to the beginning, back to the basics, so that they can then develop their ability to have it more natural.
I very much appreciate the driving analogy you just made, because I have a 16-year-old who I'm teaching how to drive, and you're absolutely right. There are things that I'm going to coach her to do to ensure safety, to ensure certain things that, not that I want her to be unsafe later, but as she builds confidence, as she builds an awareness and a command for this behavior, she'll be able to do with ease later that she wouldn't be able to do now. I don't have a really great example off the top of my head, other than I do know that when I'm on the on-ramp for the I-10, and the part of the I-10 that I get on is at 75 miles an hour, and an on-ramp is designed to help you get to the speed of everybody else on the road. Well, if the posted speed limit is 75 miles an hour, you can only imagine how fast people are actually traveling that part of the I-10. But the part of the analogy that I want to share is I gun it going up the I-10 ramp, and it's 2 lanes for about a mile, and I will fly past people because I'm like, y'all are doing 45 and the people up there are doing 90. I'm not interested in trying to do 45 and merging with people who are doing 90. So I'm going to get up to 70 or 80 miles an hour just on the on-ramp alone. But I wouldn't want her to do that. I wouldn't want her to do that. I wouldn't want her to do 45 either.
Right. She'll be a pancake.
50, 60, but I wouldn't want her to do exactly what I'm doing just yet. I would want her to build up the confidence and the know-how so that she can navigate that safely. And I think that's what we're talking about here too, is a separate checking account for gas and routine maintenance with its own debit card was something that my wife and I needed for safety purposes so that we wouldn't start to spend more than what we had budgeted for our gas. Mm-hmm. Well, fast forward years and years and years of, hey, we finally got a handle on this thing. Switching over to a credit card, which is what I do now, was an easy transition because we're still setting aside the money for gas. We're just using a different tool at the pump to pay for it, but the behavior is still the same. So we established a behavior. That behavior has continued on. We use a different tool to execute the behavior.
And I'm guessing that that is where you quote unquote misspoke. I know you didn't actually misspeak, but that's where it became a little bit confusing because then you, in the present tense, mentioned a credit card. I'm just guessing.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So in the present tense, I was talking about how we put groceries on a credit card. We put gas on a credit card. Well, oops, didn't you just say 20 minutes earlier that you have a separate checking account with a separate debit card for your gas purchases? And yes, so I was speaking in the present tense about something that my wife and I did years ago. Then I came truly to the present and started speaking more accurately about what is actually happening. And as you had mentioned earlier, what it did is it fueled this conversation between this couple where he heard one thing, she heard another. They're talking about it after class. And it's like, wait, he said this. No, he said this. So they come back to find out that indeed, Nino said both things.
That's great. I'm guessing that they each heard the thing that you said that they wanted to hear. And I find that really fascinating because in this case, they ended up both being right. You ended up saying the same thing. And yet they both, you said it to both. You said both things in both of their presence and they did not hear both. They each heard one. And I just find that very, very interesting because I was in the same room and I heard neither. I mean, I actually did. I heard both, but because as you're talking about it, I'm like, oh, yeah, I remember him talking about that. But I think because I'm not personally invested in what you're saying as much as they're personally invested in that, I did not even pick up on the contradiction, but because they each, and neither did they did not pick up on the contradiction either. And I think that's the whole point of this is that they heard the thing that they really wanted to be able to do. And isn't that interesting how we do that when somebody says something that we're actually like, oh yeah, that's great. I want to do that. That's what we hold on to. And in this case, they both wanted something different and you happened to give them each what they wanted on accident. And so this will be a really good conversation for them now because now they have to recognize, okay, we are on separate pages with this. How do we reconcile that together?
Yeah, how do we get on the same page? And understanding that you might do something for a season. I talk a lot about seasons, right? So my wife and I did a separate checking account with a separate debit card for a season. And one of the reasons why we did that to even begin with, we started the cash envelope system. My wife loved it. But when it came to the pump specifically, we had 2 young children. How wildly inconvenient to drag the kids out of the car to go inside to pay for gas, prepay with cash, to come back out to the car. No. We'll just establish a second checking account with a separate debit card. And so you can still slide it at the pump, but we're doing debit instead of credit at that particular time. And I've evolved or I've graduated from that for a couple of reasons. The number one reason, and I had to share this with the couple too, because like, oh, well, why not just do the credit card first? Because until you establish the habit of never putting something on a credit card that you don't already have the cash to pay for, which is the habit that we built, right? Using that debit card, we built the habit of, oh, well, we have to have the cash to make this happen. So we just carried that over. My number one reason for switching is security. Security. I don't want my debit card and my checking account at risk the same way I'm willing to risk the bank's money and my credit card number because I know how quickly banks rectify fraud and whatnot when it comes to credit. That's not to say that they don't do it for debit, but sometimes it seems to take a little bit extra effort and time. And oh, by the way, if that money has left my checking account, like that's my money. Like now I don't have access to that money and I'm waiting for it to come back. And so it's for those reasons that I've made the switch. but the behavior, the established behavior, comes with it.
Makes sense.
So one of the other things that I wanted to address as we're talking about this conversation is, how do you know that you can graduate from maybe doing something with a debit card to a credit card and not just revert back into old bad habits? Like, how can we know and how can we manage this concept of, I want to do it this other way? How do I know that I'm doing it in a good, productive, healthy way and not just reverting back to old bad behaviors?
It's a great and loaded question, I think, because there are going to be so many different variables that each individual, each couple, each family has that they bring to the table. I am familiar with the stages of change, and I don't know how familiar you are with that or how familiar our listeners are with that. But it's this idea that every time we make a change, there are different stages that we as human beings tend to go through. And they go very quickly. It's to pre-contemplation, contemplation, and then preparation, action. And we go to relapse and then maintenance. And the relapse, as you may guess, is when you relapse into old behaviors. I think that what you're describing right now could teeter on relapse if it's not caught early enough. And I think that that's where that question is, like, hey, how do I mature in my my decision-making process and the behaviors that I'm doing without reverting back to some of the old behaviors that ultimately got us in the position that we want. And the reason I say it's so loaded, Nino, is because oftentimes with relapse behaviors, it's very subtle. Like the beginnings of it are very, very subtle. And so, you might do one habit here, a little habit there, and you're not going to get bad results right away. It's kind of like when you are, trying to eat better and you get all these really great results, and then you have a donut here and a piece of pizza there, and there's nothing quote unquote bad about either of that. We talk about moderation, everything in moderation. But you're not going to gain 5 pounds by a donut. But if you continue that along the way, you might be back where you started. And so it's very similar when it comes to our money habits. And it will be difficult to know right away, is this something that's going to lead me down the path? And so we have to sort of recognize what's happening in our minds, what's happening emotionally for us. Don't just look at the consequence yet, because the consequence isn't going to give you enough information to know whether or not you're heading in a bit of a dangerous direction. So when you do this thing, when you swipe that credit card in your example for gas, do you get excited about that? Like, are you like, oh gosh, I'm so glad I didn't need the cash for that today. I'm able to, put this on this card and I don't have to worry about it. And if the answer is yes, actually, there's like this sense of relief that comes, and I don't put the money right back on there. To your point, never put something on a credit card that you don't already have the cash to pay for. Maybe give yourself a bridge where you put it on the credit card and then you pay for it right away. Because I know that we've gotten to the point now, and I think that maybe you have too, that you don't need to pay it off until it's due. But going from using straight debit card or cash to not paying your credit card off until it's due will likely make that transition more of a relapse, because you're not practicing the bridge there where it's like, okay, I have the cash for this, let me just pay it. And now there's at least that mental awareness that I don't have that money on hand anymore.
That's very interesting, because there's a young couple that we coach. They both have experiences that tie to what we're talking about here. On his end, he always pays almost immediately after he makes a charge.
Okay.
But there was a very small bout of unemployment, and there was a need to say, hey, not yet, right? Like, it's not due for another couple of weeks. let's not make those payments just yet because you still have to go and grab some groceries and that sort of thing. 6 of one, half a dozen the other, right? Because had he just made the credit card payment, he could have just used the credit card to then buy the groceries, but then he would have been buying groceries without having the money. And so there was this little like, ooh, and so there was conversation that took place about how to manage that. And he's re-employed now, and so it's no longer an issue. On her side, there had been a little bit of apathy growing in, I'm just going to use the credit card, and we're going to find a way to pay it off, but it went on long enough that the reoccurring charges on her credit card are about $200 a month. So when I'm meeting with them bi-weekly, and she's like, yeah, my credit card balance is $757, we're all like, whoa, what just happened there? And so there was money to pay it off, but we had to like recalibrate and re-engage with what's going on. And there was just a lot of stress, and stress was leading to mindless spending. Mm-hmm. And that mindless spending was adding up in ways that she just wasn't paying attention to. Like, she heard the number when we would get together, and, you know, she's telling me, okay, the credit card balance is this time and this time. But revisiting that, hey, your reoccurring monthly charges that are on the credit card are normally $200. That means there's $500 of excess spending happening here. Mm-hmm. Was just a conversation that needed to happen because there was this apathy around things are stressful, work stressful, the economy stressful, stress. I'm just going to do this thing. And things started to go a little bit sideways, but we brought that back into alignment as well.
That's great. Yeah. And I think it's a really great example. I think the thing that you pulled out, or that I pulled out from what you just stated, is that there was an established parameter maybe, or established number of the recurring spending, so that you had that information to go on. And the only way that that was the case is because there was that bridge that was put in place, whether it was him paying it off right away, or maybe she at least, you know, was able to work with you to know here's approximately what we'll have. But that, having to see that, gave you that confidence that when you saw an outlier, to go, here's the approximate amount that we can't really account for, and here's why. So that sort of speaks to my idea about this bridge, because you really need to have some information. Otherwise, it's just like, well, this was all spending that we needed to do, and it just so happens that it's higher this month than the other month. And so without that information, it's really hard to know whether you have sort of slipped back into bad habits, or if you've slipped back into just more of a strategy. And so that, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway from that.
Yeah. And for her, she loves the cash envelope system. So part of that was she works at a place that sells food. And so it was very easy to just, you know, with employee discount and all that stuff, I'm going to get the food here. So going back to the cash envelope system and saying, hey, maybe we need to have more dollars allocated towards this than we do right now. And so we had a conversation. Okay, yep, we're going to allocate a few more dollars towards that. When we implemented that, I met with them 2 weeks later. She's like, I haven't even spent half of what we allocated, because going back to dealing with cash and the idea that like the money I have. And so she was stewarding the money she had more wisely, because now she was dealing with cash again versus just swiping the card, because the incidentals, you know, any one $20 purchase doesn't seem like a big deal, but you do one $20 purchase 10 times and all of a sudden you're $200 outside your budget.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
So these are the types of conversations that we find ourselves in and having when we not only sit down with our clients for their one-on-one financial coaching, but when we're delivering the class, you know, just having couples and these questions come up are an incredible opportunity to go deeper and to provide additional clarity. So just wanted to do that here today as well. Our challenge for our listeners this week is I want you to reflect on one thing that you heard from this episode that you were glad to hear. Just like our couple heard what they wanted to hear and got excited about what they heard, but they needed to be challenged. So that's the real challenge, is identify the thing you heard that you were excited about, but challenge why. What about that got you excited? Are you looking for permission to do something? Are you looking for somebody to validate your thought process? And what would it look like if you challenged what you thought you wanted?
That's a tough one, Challenge accepted.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Christ Centered Stewardship Podcast. Follow us on your favorite social media platform for more encouragement and support. And until next time, may the Lord keep you in perfect peace as you set your sight on Jesus.